Getting the correct bike for you and then getting it set up as well as possible is going to make that bike much more comfortable, more fun, more confidence inspiring, and also fast. So here are a few tips on getting the perfect bike setup. Step number one of getting the perfect bike setup is actually getting the correct bike. So there's all sorts of different mountain bikes on the market at the moment, different wheel sizes, different travel if you've got a full suspension bike, even different tyre sizes. So if you're just new to this, I would generally speak to a local bike shop or take a look at the manufacturer's websites. You can get an awful lot of information from there, and also check out things like the geometry and the full specs of the bike. It's going to tell you what that bike is good for. This is my Canyon Strive. This is a 160mm travel full suspension bike. It's really an enduro bike. It's got 27.5-inch wheels. So I'm going to talk you through how I set this bike up and how you can use this to tailor your bike to fit you and make it work perfectly for you. So you've got the correct bike for you. The first thing I'll now do is set up my pressures. So suspension, air pressures, and also tyres. If you've got a full suspension bike, I would start with the rear shock, and I always go for 30% sag on there. We've done a full video on that, so check that one out if you haven't done already. But I will always get it there, 30%, then ride the bike, and you can always play around with things like the air volume spaces inside the shock if you still feel like it's a little bit too soft. Same with the fork, I will actually try and set the sag at about 20 to 25% and then play around with volume spaces if I want to make that fork maybe more progressive. Onto the tyres. So personally I go for about 28, 30 in the rear and about 28, 26 in the front. You can go a little bit softer in front because most of your weight is over that rear tyre, and that's where you get all those big impacts. Again, if you're having to go much harder than that because you're puncturing all the time, I'll then think about getting a tougher tyre. So maybe going up to a dual ply tyre or a downhill tyre. Actually picking that tyre for the bike also makes a big difference to how that bike will ride. So an enduro bike like this, you're probably more likely to see single ply tyres but with a slightly tougher casing, like a protection casing, and fairly big tread. But I've actually got these dual ply Kaiser downhill tyres on this bike because I want to actually tweak the setup to make this bike feel a little bit more like a downhill bike. So now looking at bar height and bar width, let's start with the width. I run 760mm bars on every bike of mine, except for cross-country bikes where they're slightly shorter. But that just suits me. It's just down to personal preference really. I find I do like wide bars, but any wider and I start hitting my hands on trees and things like that, so that's about perfect for me. Bar height makes a massive difference to how your bike rides. You basically want to get your bike balanced out. So this bike I do like to ride downhill, like I've already mentioned, so I've actually got a few spaces underneath that stem. So I've got a relatively high bar. Great for going downhill, just keeps your weight a little bit further back on the bike. Not so good for steep climbs where I'm having to actually get more weight onto the bars, but that's the compromise for me and it works fine. I'm running a 40mm stem on here, so again, nice and short, makes that bike really aggressive and good for going down hills. If I wanted it to climb a little bit better, again, I could probably put like a 60, 80mm stem on that, just to get a bit more weight further forward. Getting the brake levers in the correct spot is going to make a big difference to how well you can use them and therefore stop, obviously. So one of the biggest considerations is actually the angle on the actual handlebar. So again, I ride a little bit more downhill style on this bike, so I actually like them relatively high, so quite flat on the bar, so that when I'm over the back of the bike braking hard, I can get to them nicely. Also, one finger braking is very important. If you've got disc brakes, you should be using just one finger because you need all those other fingers and thumb really grasping onto the bar. When it comes to brake rotor size, the bigger they are, the better your braking is going to be. They're more suited to downhill. They're going to dissipate heat slightly better, so they're not going to fade. On the front of my bike, I've got a 200mm rotor, so pretty much as big as you can get. Again, the payoff for that is weight, but it's going to be really good performance. And on the rear, I've got a 180. Next options you've got with gearing, so different size chainring, and obviously you could go 1 or 2 by. I'm running a 1 by, it just suits the enduro bike much better. And I've got a 1x11, 1146 cassette on the rear, so a big spread, and that is matched to a 34 tooth chainring, which is probably about average. Let's say you're maybe a really fit rider, you could probably go up to 36 on there, but down to 32 is going to suit you a little bit better if you do more climbing. With the pedals, you've got the 2 different options of style, either flat or clips, depending on what you like to ride. I ride clips most of the time, and then you've got different options as well. These are the Crank Brothers Mallet E, so the enduro pedals, they're sort of mid-size. You have got a cage on there. You can go bigger than that with a Mallet DH, obviously the payoff is weight, or you can go lighter with a cross-country pedal, but you don't have that support around that clip system in the middle. The saddle choice is really all about comfort, and getting the correct saddle height is really important for getting the most efficient pedaling. I would say a dropper post is great for almost every bike other than the lightest weight cross-country bike or a downhill bike where you just don't need one. So if you don't have one, I would definitely recommend it as an upgrade. So when it comes to getting the perfect bike setup, for me, there are some things that will stay almost exactly the same between my bikes, and that is the bar width, the angle of the brake levers, all my cockpit setup will be almost exactly the same between my bikes. And obviously then it's like picking the frame. So this bike is very good for enduro, and then I can tweak the bike by changing things like the tyres and the wheels to really make a big difference to how that bike rides. So therefore tweak it one way or the other to really make that bike suit the exact type of riding that I do. So there's a few tips on how to get the perfect bike setup. For me, I'll always take in multi-tool on the trail, especially if it's a new bike and I've just set it up, so that I can still tweak those things like brake levers if they don't feel quite right the first time. If you want to see some more in-depth videos on bike setup, click over there for how to set up your suspension, and just down here for tyre pressures explained. Click on the GMBN logo to subscribe if you haven't done already. Give us a thumbs up if you found this video useful.